Hello, everyone. This is Alfredo Abate, your current Chicago Oracle Users Group President. Welcome to today's webinar. As an attendee, you'll be in listen-only mode. You can ask questions in the chat window, which we will monitor. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, and we'll also be streaming live on our YouTube channel, and the recording will be available there to view shortly after the presentation is finished. It's great to be here with you today virtually. For those that are new to the Chicago Oracle Users Group, we welcome you. Traditionally, our group meets between 4 to 6 times per year in various locations around the Chicagoland suburbs for presentations, as well as hands-on workshop by Oracle experts, ACEs, and authors. With the restrictions in place due to COVID, we decided to go virtual, as many others have, to continue to deliver awesome technical content to our members. Today is our 14th webinar in a series of 20 that we'll be holding until November 18th. We are down to only 6 more presentations after today, so make sure to visit our website and register for those remaining webinars. And as you can see in front of you, our website is just coug.us. Our user group runs completely unfunded. Our members don't pay any dues, and our meetings have always been free. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, OAPS Net Partners, for providing the Zoom webinar platform. They are an Oracle Gold partner and systems integrator with specialties in areas of financial business solutions based on Oracle applications, both on premises and in the cloud. They provide services in the areas of AP automation, Apex development, database upgrades, and administration. Next week, don't miss our webinar with Oracle Developer Advocate for SQL and part of the Ask Tom Answer team, Chris Saxon, on pattern matching and SQL plus SQL macros equals pure SQL awesomeness. You can register for that on our website right now. Today, we are excited to have Oracle ACE Director and who I consider the largest contributor to the COUG, Jim Czuprynski, on What's Your Superpower? Mine is machine learning with Oracle Autonomous DB. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Alfredo. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Not that you could answer because you're all muted. Thanks, Alfredo. Let me take it from here. And by the way, thanks OAPSnet for supporting us and the Chicago Oracle Users Group. And yeah, I have to admit, Alfredo, I am probably the largest contributor, mainly because of COVID, and I've been sitting on my butt a lot, way too much over the last several months. But you know, today it's a beautiful Chicago area day, early fall day. So like my friends in the Scandinavian countries say, no matter what, if the weather's nice outside and you don't get outside, that's a sin against nature. So get outside today, no matter what. Anyway, today I'm talking about one of my favorite topics, which is machine learning. And the reason I really got involved with Oracle machine learning, especially in concert with Autonomous DB, is I was already doing a lot of work with Autonomous DB. I was really fascinated by both ADW and ATP. And I kept noting, though, that every time I was up against people like Haley Helskayo from Finland, and she was talking about machine or learning, everybody was in the other room. And I figured maybe I'd better get on this boat before it sails. And I'm so glad I did, because I discovered a whole aspect of Oracle database that I didn't even really understand was there until I started delving into it. So the good news is, by the way, you don't have to necessarily be on an autonomous database. It helps. But if you've got an Oracle database license, you already have access to Oracle machine learning. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different ways that you can get access to it right now. Not too much more about myself today. Most of you already know me pretty well. Been an ACE director since 2014, DBA since 2001. By the way, I do a lot of work these days with OD-TUG. In fact, you may have seen a tweet yesterday. I'm running for the OD-TUG board. There's only 2 slots open, and there are fantastic volunteers that are, volunteering their time for that. I will not be offended if you don't vote for me. But, you know, I'd like to respectfully ask for your vote, but it's going to be a tough choice. I looked at the other folks running and I went, I'm not going to vote for me. There are some folks that, in my opinion, are just as deserving, if not more. But one thing I do want to mention about OD-TUG is that I am the editor of Techceleration, which is a database really applications and database centric portal that we've recently built for OD COUG. If you have some articles you'd like me to consider, I know Alfredo's written at least a couple for us. My colleagues, Liran Amitsi and several of my colleagues from past jobs and other ACEs and ACE directors have written stuff. If you're interested, contact me, reach out to me at this email address. I'd be more than happy to consider that request. But let's get moving on to the real topic today, which is all about where we're headed. Machine learning and analytics are merely part of the new digitally driven strategy that all businesses, especially because of COVID-19, are driving towards today. If you're not going that way and your organization's not, might be time to ask some questions why you're not. I found this article from The Onion from a couple of years ago I thought was hilarious because here's a bunch of guys that are all wearing the same color shirt at a particular organization, and they're all like, wow, the statistical anomaly that presents, but it's a beautiful use case for machine learning and for analytics, right? How likely is it that these three guys would show up with that same shirt? That's the kind of questions we ask every day, just not in such a humorous vein, right? And what's interesting about where we're headed, by the way, what I call the new digitally driven or converged database, you're going to be hearing a lot about that from Oracle in the next several weeks and months. The idea of a converged platform for doing everything you need. The interesting part is this stat here from CIO Mag that 90% of application developers are saying it's not code, it's not the unavailability of data, it's their dumb database administrators that are holding them up because it takes too long to upgrade or update a database and get it ready for what they need. And here's a few other stats that blew me away. These are relatively recent, not more than 18 months old. We're still spending 3/4 of our IT budgets on keeping the lights on. This has changed a bit with COVID, but still, it's probably pretty high. The one that got me was 4 out of 10 DBAs practically are managing 50 databases or more. And if you aren't considering autonomous database or a public cloud-based database, and you're an Oracle DBA, my friends, you're going to be out of a job because the autonomicity of public cloud available databases is ubiquitous today. I have an ATP instance that I'm going to demonstrate a little bit against today, right? I haven't looked at its alert log in 8 months. I have no idea what that database is doing right now, and I don't care. And I'm a professional DBA. I like that because it gives me freedom. The freedom to help my organization become digitally driven, truly concentrating on the information that I can glean from the data. And this is a new trend. It really is. We used to be much more generalists in IT, and I can speak to that having grown up essentially as an all-around developer. I handled the database. I handled everything. I wrote the code. I loaded the data. Over the last 20 years, 30 years, we've gotten much more fragmented, right? Into DBAs and network administrators and storage admins, and those positions are simply going away unless you work for a cloud provider, right? And I found this quote really interesting in this book I've been reading, that Nobel laureates are more than 20 times likely to have some other hobby that's at right angles to what they specialize in. I love this story. My father-in-law, by the way, was part of Antifa. Did you know that? My father-in-law. Yeah, my father-in-law died at an early age because he was an Antifa guy. Yeah, he had fought the Nazis in Germany. He was at Bastogne. He was at the Battle of Bastogne. This guy, General Nuts McAuliffe, is the guy that replied to the Germans, you know, we have you all surrounded, you should surrender. He said nuts because he didn't swear. He probably would have used more colorful language, but he didn't like vulgar language. And he also told his troops, we can now attack in any direction. And if you're a DBA today, or even an apps developer, and you haven't touched machine learning or algorithms or analytics, here's the good news. The data scientists are brilliant mathematicians in many cases. You know what they complain about the most? The data's not there. The data's not clean. It's the wrong data. I can't get to it quickly enough. If you're an Oracle DBA or even an apps DBA, you have the enemy, if you will, career dilapidation, exactly where you want it. You can attack in any direction. If data's the new oil, you're the whatever they could call it. What do they call those guys out in the oil fields, right? Roughhousers or something like that. I forget what the term is. The roustabouts, right? The people that are driving the pipes down into the wells, except this time they're digital wells. And here's the beautiful thing. If you have an autonomous database right now, ATP or ADB, you are, I should say ATP or ADW, you already have Apex built in. You don't have to build an ORDS server. You don't have to deploy that. It's already built in as part of that environment. Now, if you haven't messed around with Apex, oh, you got to take a look at it. I was just working on a project. I was talking with Alfredo just before we started for our local District 6 congressional district election. And I was helping them build out a project in Node.js and JavaScript. And I'm like, if I had them allow me to use Apex to do this, I would have been done already, because I really needed a database underneath the covers. And I could have built it out without having to learn React and Node.js and everything else and put it all in Apex and deployed it via a private web domain if I wanted to, right? I can draw data directly in from just about anywhere, especially the bane of our existence, Excel spreadsheets, right? The thing I don't like about Excel is that it gets overused as a database platform. There was just a news story this past week that the UK COVID team screwed up by using an Excel spreadsheet, as its database, because they didn't realize there was a limit to the amount of data that they could put in it, and they left 16,000 COVID-19 cases out of their study. So be aware, Excel is a great little tool for editing data and maybe even doing some calculations and some neat little graphs, but it ain't a database. Here's another thing that's cool. A lot of the data that's out there right now is behind an API. I did a presentation a few weeks back on using a REST API call to do geolocation from a particular website. And I was able to batch geolocate, or geocode, I should say, 2,500 addresses in one fell swoop, right? Get their latitude and longitude. How? Through an API. You know what's cool about this? With a REST API that's built into an autonomous database, or really in any Oracle database, but especially with autonomous, you don't have to write complex insert, update, and delete statements unless you really want to. You can use Apex as a low-code environment. And why? Because the data has got to be mined. It's got to be pulled out. We've got to make sense of it with algorithms, and we've got to get towards digitally driven. And if anything's accelerated this, my friends, it's been COVID. It has absolutely accelerated companies and empowered and emboldened companies and organizations to go, let's get digitally driven. And I'm going to show you how easy it is. Are you ready? Don't go away, because I want to share this with you. There are about 24 different machine learning algorithms, some unsupervised, some supervised. Unsupervised means here's the data, go learn, build a model, and now I'm going to test that model and see how accurate it is. For an example of this, the decision tree algorithm is an unsupervised algorithm, okay? A machine learning algorithm. So these and many, many more, there's a great little link here that will show you the most recent set of these, right? But there are all kinds of different things that you can do. Sometimes we want to draw things together and find things that are common. Sometimes we want to find groupings of data, clustering. The first one is classification. Sometimes we want to project out into the future or into a different dimension. Sometimes we want to find anomalies like fraud detection. The cool thing is these mathematical models are built into every Oracle database under DBMS Data Miner. I never even knew about that until I started getting into this. And once you understand that, it is super easy to build it out. Here's the cool thing. If you've got an ADW or ATP instance, this was an ADW instance I built on, you can create an OML user. By the way, you'll note here that I actually said, please send me an email back, dear Oracle, when you're done building my user. By the way, you know what this is? A schema. It's actually a schema inside an ADW instance in this case. It sent me back an email address, I should say an email, and I changed my password and I was up and running. My user account was named AIML noob because I was a newbie at this point. This was only about 18 months ago, folks. What's really cool that they built into what's called Oracle Machine Learning, which is part of Autonomous Database, is something called Zeppelin notebooks. So I can create my own projects, my own workspaces. Here's an example, creating a brand new project. I named it Stock Trends because I'm going to be running against a TPCE schema, which is a basic stock trading platform. Right, I'm going to show you some really cool little things I was able to do in minutes with this Zeppelin notebook. So I created this project, and then I created a new notebook called Basic Trends, and I granted for about the 20 or so different tables inside the TPCE schema, I granted permissions to my AIML noob user account. This is basically all that you have to do for any of your new OML users. And then I built a little query. What this query does is glue about 8 tables together and looks at 1/4's worth of stock trading data, right? So essentially think of this like, if you will, an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of columns in it. I essentially denormalized my TPCE schema into more of a traditional data warehousing master table, right? That has a bunch of stuff in it. Basically, that lets me gather data about particular stock sales and purchases, right? Purchases of equities inside a system. When I run a paragraph, and by the way Zeppelin's design is you can have multiple, what they call paragraphs, which are essentially SQL statements, sometimes returning a report, sometimes returning the results of a machine learning exercise, and sometimes simply returning graphics. We'll get to that in just a second. Here's an example of just returning some raw data. And by the way, this is fake data, right? This is just generated data, custom generated data. And what you can see here, by the way, is there's an abbreviation for a trade type, right? And we'll see that broken out here in just a minute. But these are essentially imagined almost like somebody imported an Excel spreadsheet. In this case, it's built from several different tables, about 8 or 9 different tables for 1/4's worth of data. And now what I'm going to do is visualize it, right? What's really amazing is a significant part of machine learning. It's not just the mathematics, but the point is quickly visualizing things so that you can understand trends. And in this case, all I did was do a count across the different types of trades: a limit buy, a market sell, a limit purchase, and so forth, right? There's 5 basic categories or trade types of trades. And I built a little pie chart here. And all I had to do was take columns out of this query, the data that I just showed you, and drag it into a chart. That's all I had to do. And if I want to make it more complex, if I want to add a secondary layer of grouping, in this case, all I did was drag the address country column into the grouping box. It wasn't there before, right? And I've instantaneously now got stuff broken out within the 2 countries in this particular data set, US and Canada. That's what they gave us, right, in the sample data, and the 5 different types of trades. This took literally seconds. And now I've got an idea of how things are distributed out across those 2 simple groupings. Okay, I don't like pie charts much. They don't tell me much except breakouts, right? It's hard to see comparisons within that. So simply by clicking on a different button up here in that, if you see that highlighted section up there, a red outline section, I simply said, give me a stacked bar graph. That's all I did. Now I've got things broken out within country as well as within the trade type. And by the way, if I want to change this from the total quantity of equity sold, I could say, hey, I could drag in there bid price and say, let's graph this or map this out based on minimum bid price, maximum trade price. I could even drag any one of these columns that makes sense into here, right? Now, one thing to understand about OML, by the way, is that it's really aimed at an experienced data scientist. Maybe not a PhD, okay, could even be an intern, a college intern at your company, right? That's gotten quite a bit of experience with this, maybe someone that's a little younger that already understands this, but there is some understanding that they understand the algorithms and the groupings that they're going after. But what's really cool is that built into Zeppelin is the ability to choose from, remember I said about 24 different algorithm types? Well, what they've done is throw out that one, My First Notebook, right? I mean, that's just basic stuff showing you how to do things. But these 8 different breakouts, right, are wide arrays, if you will, or wide groupings of numerous machine learning techniques. We're going to follow a couple of these going forward here, specifically time series. And what's really beautiful about this is I love the way they presented this, right? Oh, look at that little graph up there in that top right-hand corner of that paragraph. Oh, I get it. We're going to take data that exists and we're going to use what's called an ESM, an exponential smoothing algorithm to forecast data forward. But wait, there's more. Oracle builds for you in this example the code that they use using all the different settings for DBMS data mining, showing you exactly how to pick exactly the algorithm that makes sense and do some basic configuration of that algorithm so that you can quickly drop and then recreate models based on, in this case, they're using the data from the good old sales history or SH schema to do this. When I execute the model, all the SQL statements to necessarily create them, another beautiful thing, if you're not a data scientist, and I'm not, but I understand the basics of what they're trying to achieve here, I need to know all kinds of different parameters, right? Imagine that a machine learning algorithm of being like a box with 20 knobs on it, right? You got to understand what the knobs actually do. And a professional data scientist understands that. But there's some basic ones that we all can understand. Confidence level, right? Especially with the election going on right now, right? And we're talking about polling and people are going, well, you know, so-and-so is X times more likely to win than so-and-so, right? You know, take, for example, the Iowa Senate race right now where Joni Ernst is running against, she's the incumbent, she's running against another woman in that state, and it's neck and neck, right? And they'll talk about things like, well, she's got a 51% chance of winning within 5 degrees of freedom or within 3.5 degrees of error, right? That's what a confidence level basically is. So there's some basic knobs here that we have control over, but the cool thing is the model actually tells us, hey, you didn't change that. That's the default that I set. Don't change this unless you really understand, right? You can actually take a look at the different attributes that come back from the model. And here's the result of the time series forecast used. Now, again, unless you're a data scientist, you probably don't care about some of these things, but I understand some of the basics of these, alpha, beta, some of the other ones, right, that are all metrics about how accurate the model is, how trustworthy the results of the model are. And you can look all these things up. By the way, the Data Mining Concepts Guide is really good at explaining what these things mean. You don't have to have a PhD in advanced mathematics to understand how the knob works, but you do need to understand what the knob is. Finally, this is where things get interesting. This is actually using the SSH schema. Remember the good old amount sold column? They took the data from prior periods, from early 1995, it looks like, or sorry, 1998, and took the data through the end of October, the end of 2001, and forecasted for a future set of quarters. Here's what we believe the forecast will be for amount sold. And see those bands, the light brown and dark brown bands? Remember when we were going through all the COVID stuff and they were going, well, if we don't flatten the curve, this is going to be what happens. If we do flatten the curve, here's the minimum and maximum lives that we'll save, right? It's going to be somewhere in between here. Remember back when we were actually data-driven about this, right? Until relatively recently, that's what we were going after, right? In this case, we're showing you the upper and lower bounds of that forecast. In other words, how accurate or inaccurate it might be, right? Based on a confidence interval, essentially. And what I did then is I actually used, this is just a couple more pieces of information about attribute importance, yet another model. I'm not going to spend any extra time on this, but again, like I said, there's 8 basic groupings of things that you can do. Again, if you're not sure which one to use, that little graph up in the right-hand corner tells you, is this what you really wanted? Wait a minute, I don't see anything forecasting forward. This is grouping things together, identifying what are called key factors. Oh, okay, this isn't what I want. I must be looking at the wrong model. That's the beauty of this. What I did is I took my TPC DS model that I had. I had a database with, I think, around 20 million, 220 million or 280 million rows, I think it was. And I actually grabbed real data from that time period from 1998 through 2000, the end of 2002, and built a similar forecast. And again, this is simulated data, but still I'm saying it's not the same thing as the SH schema. And I was able to construct, simply by adapting that model, a reasonably accurate forecast into the next 2 years, the next 8 quarters, if you will, with a few simple statements, simply by following the model that the prior information I showed you against the SH schema. I used it right here. So that's pretty advanced, right? If you're a data scientist, or you've got a background in data science, or you've been looking for this, you're like, yeah, okay. But if you're not, and you're a little mystified, let me show you something even better. If you're a citizen data scientist, for example, as I mentioned, I'm working on a congressional campaign, right? I've got access to some tools, but I'm also interested in doing a deeper dive, but a lot of times I don't know where to start. So another case that I have is my wife volunteers at an agricultural facility, right? Essentially the Morton Arboretum. And she does a lot of data science out there. In fact, she's just coming back today from doing studies of how effective prairie plants, when planted together or planted in separate plots, work very well to restore a prairie. That's a perfect use case for citizen data science. And here's the idea. Oracle has another tool. It's not free. OML is. OML, or Oracle Machine Learning, with Zeppelin notebooks, is built into Autonomous Data Warehouse. If you want to do some additional, or get some additional help with this thing called OAC, or Oracle Analytics Cloud, there is a little bit of a charge to use it, but it's available inside the cloud. In fact, I'm going to show you what it looks like. And it's part of the converged database strategy, right? Essentially getting data from anywhere, everything on the left-hand side, pulling it into an autonomous database. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to put the data directly inside the database. It could be an external source and left externally. That's what converged database is really all about. But then eventually accessing it inside Oracle Analytics Cloud and performing our own machine learning. So I mentioned I was working on the campaign. One of the things I was able to obtain, or really model based on this information, was, hey, I'm going to look at some voter demographics. In Illinois, we have what's called a closed primary system. In other words, when you walk into your polling place for primaries, you must declare Republican, Independent, Democrat, right? We know that data. We know how you declare. We have no idea how you voted. You might have declared independent and voted Republican, right? But we do know how people declared, and we know some basic information. This is a matter of public record, right? We exercise franchise, and we make this record available to people, not who you voted for. I want to make that real plain. I'm an election judge as well. I have no idea how people vote. but I do know some basic ideas on how they declared themselves. And so I'm able to pull some very interesting, simple information, including their ethnicity, right? Also their income level. Actually, it's interesting the way the data comes. And by the way, the Republicans and the Democrats each have their own different sources for this data. And so do the independents, right? They lumped a bunch of stuff together in one column. I wanted to point that out. It's very interesting how they did this. And also, whether or not someone was an independent or undeclared completely, we don't know how they declared, right? But they're a registered voter because they voted in a general election, but not in a primary, right? But if they're a lean Republican or a strong Republican, I wanted to just get to which party they really belong to, GOP, Dem, or independent, or unspecified. I built this view and I made it available to Oracle Analytics Cloud. So this data set runs against actually an ATP instance called Recloned. I drilled into that and found a schema called VIVO, which stands for Vote Early, Vote Often. That is not a slam, by the way. It's a reminder, especially in this election, to vote as early as possible and vote in every election. That's what that really stands for. Al Capone's the guy that took it and made it sound bad. And inside here, there's my view. That, remember those SQL statements I just showed you? Voter cluster demographics was the name of the view that I built. And I can see all the data that's inside here. And I'm going to go through this part a little bit more quickly because I'm actually going to go back over and show you live what this really looks like. But so here's a bunch of the data that I was able to pull off. Again, there's no personal data here, just some voter counts within different geographies. And what I was able to do, and this is where things get so cool. I'm going to go over to my actual data set right now. Here it is, voter cluster demographics. I'm going to open this guy. This is inside OAC, and the data is going to come back. Whoops, sorry about that. And here's what's fantastic. Remember I said OAC is designed for citizen data scientists or newbies? Look at what it did over here on the side. It said, hey, I see that something called V race designation, which is right here, looks a little bit confusing to me. There looks like there's part 1, 2, and 3, and 4 inside here. Would you like me to dump that out? In other words, it's basically volunteering to do a substring on that data and pull it out for me. But here's the thing that blew me away. I love this. Hey, I see there's a zip code here. Would you like to add the latitude and add the longitude of the city center of that zip code? Now, let me tell you, I do geolocation quite a bit. I'm helping the campaign out for things like, hey, we've got a request for a campaign sign. Which volunteer should we build a route for? Okay. It's not trivial to pull this data. Where is this coming from? Oracle has a huge public, underneath the covers, public set of data about things like zip code and cities and states and countries. OAC was able to access that and immediately embed the latitude and longitude, which I need for any type of geolocation operation. Everything from finding directions to determining truly where someone is inside a geo-coded or geographic boundary. You need lat and long. And I was able to do that without me having to write a program to do it. That, my friends, is pretty impressive. That's probably worth the price of admission for people that are struggling through this to try to make it happen, right? I just want to share that with you. I find that fascinating that we're able to do that. And I already showed you all this, right? I showed you a little bit about looking for enriching it, but here's something that's really cool. I want to build a visualization of this. So I decided to pick a particular type of visualization. Now, I'll be honest, OML is a little lacking in some of the visualization techniques that are available, but OAC is not. It's got some incredibly powerful ones. And I just wanted to share you that I saved off some of the data into a project called Voter Demographic Analysis. And what I did as a result is I built this marvelous little graph. And this is the kind of things where if you're a data scientist, or if you're somebody working on a political campaign, your eyes roll in the back of your head and you go, thank you, may I please have another? Let me explain what this graph basically does. This really, it's not a graph, but a visual presentation. I'm essentially graphing not only what party you belong to, but also which age group you're a part of and what your ethnicity is. And so basically a triangle is a white voter. A circle is an Asian voter. Yeah, you can tell in our district, yeah, we're kind of white bread over in our district, to be honest, right? Yeah, we have a lot more white folks. We have a significant portion of Asian folks, India and Pakistan. We have a whole huge Hispanic population in certain areas of our district, and a fair number of African American or Black voters as well. So again, that gives me an idea of where those things are clustered. But also what's interesting is the larger the symbol, the higher the amount, the higher the count of voters in these different categories. And it's really interesting that, as again, these are the younger voters here, you can see that we've got a fair number of younger voters. It turns out that blue is Democratic in here and green is GOP, right? Or Republican. And yeah, that's interesting. What an interesting trend that people in our county, or I should say in our congressional district, as they tend towards older, tend to trend towards being declared as a GOP voter. Well, that's an amazing bit of analysis, right? Because especially if I'm a Republican, I'm not going to waste too much time trying to convince young voters, because my core base is over here in the 45 to 80 and beyond base, believe it or not. Yeah. We actually have some people that are over the age of 100 in our district that are still voting. And yeah, most of them vote Republican. It's kind of interesting in that regard. So it's fascinating stuff. And again, it doesn't matter, Democratic, Independent, or Republican, whatever you are, these governing people is the most fascinating thing we've developed in human civilization. And seeing how people affiliate themselves to ideas is just amazingly complex and beautifully wonderful to me. I love political science. A little bit more about whether you're going to use OAC or OML. When I worked for Viscosity, I left their employ in mid-April, I believe, or mid-May. I did do a couple of really neat little short 5-minute, no more than 5-minute videos. You're welcome to still look at them. I'm sure my colleagues, Charles Kim and all my colleagues still over at Viscosity, would love for you to go ahead and take a look at this. I don't know if you have to actually sign up for anything or maybe register your email, but these are real brief YouTube videos, essentially, that you can go browse extremely quickly to get everything I showed you here in 5 minutes, right? Instead of me trying to explain it all. Finally, let's wrap this up. I do a lot of work these days with Apex. I'm really surprised at how powerful Apex is for just about every solution. It is literally like the left-handed monkey wrench in my tool set. As I mentioned, some of the work I was doing for my campaign, I was looking for a sharp object to run my head into, because I was like, if I had Apex, I'd be done already. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not too far off. The thing that's great, if you do machine learning and you're working with machine learning algorithms, whether they're supervised or unsupervised models, every time you build a model, you're building a schema object. Even the information about the accuracy of the machine learning algorithm becomes a view inside a schema that is particular or specific, I should say, to that machine learning algorithm and model that you generated. That means I can use Apex to access it. No additional charge to do it, right? Apex is free. Apex has some pretty powerful, in my opinion, not quite as powerful inherent graphic tool sets, but there are always Apex plugins that you can go ahead and take a look at. And there's quite a few that are almost comparable to OAC in power. And finally, it's already there. You don't need to build an ORD server. You can have personalizable URLs, right? So I could have, if my campaign leaders had listened and understood how much better it would be to have everything built into a secure database, which would have made some things a lot simpler, The security aspect is what I love about Apex, right? And the ability to write a query to return results to a website or some sort of API, whatever it might be, is marvelous, right? And just to show you an example, I also built for the campaign, for my own edification, something called a lift analysis. We built a model based on how many times someone had voted, scratch that, had declared during a primary as either Democratic, Republican, or independent, and then ran some modeling basically saying, well, could I shift them from Democratic to Republican? Could I shift them from Republican or independent to Democrat? And let's take that last one as the final part of the model. I was able to basically take a look at and spread out across 30 different quantiles the total lift within each of these ranges. I was analyzing about 75,000 voters, so divide 30 into 75,000. You know how many are in each of these buckets, right? What we're really looking at here is not the results of that model, but the accuracy results of that model. And I can graph that as well as report on the accuracy of the model itself. What would really be nice is, let me just go back one here. I would love to have one other little box in here that said, because what's really cool about models like this is how many false positives and how many false negatives did I have, right? Again, with COVID-19 testing, this is something that we're all very familiar with, right? No one wants to be diagnosed with COVID-19 when you don't have it. On the other hand, you do want to make sure that if you are positive, you know that you're positive, right? And false positives and false negatives are both extremely damaging in healthcare, but in anything that we do to become digitally driven. So again, these are really more of representations of how accurate the model is than anything else. And the reason I'm pointing this out is I used Apex to do the visualization. I didn't use either OML, which is free, or OAC, which ain't free, but has some pretty nice visualization techniques. And finally, one other thing that I really like about Apex is the ability to handle geolocation. Now, I do have another bit of slides on this that for another presentation I do about Apex doing this. There's actually an Oracle built-in graphics, I shouldn't say graphics, but mapping plug-in. It's really built into Oracle already. And the reason I'm bringing this up is since the beginning of this year, since December 2019, actually, spatial and graph, which used to be a separate licensed feature of the Oracle database, is included at no additional cost, whether it's an on-premises or in the cloud autonomous database, or even a DBCS instance inside the Oracle public cloud, inside OCI. And there are some also excellent plugins that other folks have developed. That's the thing I love about working in Apex, right? Is that it's really easy for me to share some cool stuff with the rest of you. There's a gentleman named Jeffrey Kemp, who was an ACE director till just recently. He just joined Oracle. He built a really excellent series of Google Map plugins. I think Alfredo's demonstrated this in a couple of presentations for COUG already. And actually, this link's a little old. Jeff released a new version of this same plugin that eliminated a few little confusing things. But guys, this is, and ladies, this is a real live Google Maps API implementation inside my Apex application, right? These are actually maps of particular flippable, as we call them, flippable voters and their physical location in my town, right near my town. I think I'm actually marked as one of them, very interestingly, right about over here, if I remember correctly. No, actually, no, that's me right over here. Sorry about that. My point is, even with Apex, you can do things that you may not be able to do quite as simply in OML or OAC. OAC and OML do have these capabilities, but it's a farther stretch. If you're already using Apex, you've got everything you need. Wrapping up. Hey, what happened to Oracle 20C? Well, in case you haven't figured it out yet, 2020 is almost over. And, you know, not sure really what's going to happen to 20C, but we know there's a 21C coming, right? You know how I know that? Because there really isn't a official 20C yet, and we're bearing down on 2021. There are some awesome features that are going to be built into 21C that you've probably heard about. Cloud SQL is going to be at the heart of Converged Database. The ability to hit data anywhere and combine it with intra-RDBMS data. What Chris Saxon is talking about next week, I've seen most of the presentation, at least half of what he presented already on SQL macros. Folks, that's next week. Don't miss it. Chris is an excellent presenter. You got to check in with him on this presentation. It's really good. The main idea of SQL macros is eliminating context switching, right? If you understand how SQL and PL SQL works, that's a big thing. Something I'm fascinated by, the Autonomous JSON Database, or AJD, which has just been made available. And if you're working a lot with JSON data, you're going to see some stuff coming forward. It's actually available right now for experimental purposes, right? But if you're working a lot with JSON, I'm going to give you a hint. Geographic data, a lot of times, is stored within JSON documents. Or you've got a JSON document and you want to have a database that's specifically focused on JSON instead of having to mess with a JSON data type. This is something you might want to consider. You probably heard about blockchain tables. Native blockchain tables are already available for experimental purposes, right? But it's a fascinating topic. I don't have anybody right off the top of my head that's done a lot of work with that, but check it out, especially if you need to have essentially highly secure and guaranteed, never changing data, right? Which is the key point about blockchain data. And then finally, something you're going to be hearing an enormous amount about in something called OML for Pi. Actually, it's called AutoML for OML for Pi. Essentially, instead of having to figure out which machine learning algorithm should I use and possibly picking the incorrect one, check this out. In 21C, it will actually tell you, dear Jim, it looks to me like you're trying to do a classification operation. Have you considered using A, B, C machine learning algorithm or this model? That's something that's going to be built in to the database environment in 21C. I have no idea exactly what that's going to look like, but it sounds fascinating to me and it's really going to make our lives easier. That's all I have. Any questions? I'll go take a look in the chat, but otherwise, over to you guys. I don't know if we have chat. Yep, in the chat. I don't see any messages. Does anybody have anything in chat?
I don't see anything either, Jim.
Okay. Well, I'll stick around here for a few more minutes and see if anybody has any questions. You probably have seen parts of my presentation before, and that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. This is really good. Really gives, especially those that are DBAs on the call, something to think about if you're still contemplating what things you should, skill sets you should pick up. I definitely think this is one of them. Machine
yeah.
learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing of it is, it's easy. It's a lot easier than it looks. It is not hard to do, right? And one thing, Alfredo, that you mentioned that, remember the always free layer contains an autonomous database. You can start doing OML today. You can start using Oracle Machine Learning right now.
Yeah,
So,
that's absolutely correct. Yeah, I was just going to say in 2 weeks, it's my turn to give the webinar for the COUG, and it will be on the always free tier of the Oracle Cloud. So I'll be talking about what you get and even show you how you can use that free tier to leverage to make some proof of concepts for whether it be for yourself, your company, whatever.
Excellent.
So yeah, a lot of great stuff that we're getting for free.
Yeah, yeah. Now, OAC is not included as part of Always Free, just to make that clear. Okay.
That's true.
But again, remember, give Oracle a credit card, watch your subscription. Remember, you get $300 in credits for free. You can still quite a bit, right, of free material. $300 will buy you at least some OAC credits, right?
Correct.
I got a couple questions in here. Oracle Maps versus Google Maps. Excellent question. Well, Google Maps is, the Google Maps API, right? Essentially, if you think about it, it's JavaScript that you're running on a Google Maps developer API key, right? So you do need a Google Maps, a Google developer API key, and you have to enable that through your Google Maps, your Google developer account, right? That's what a lot of people kind of get frustrated with. The Oracle Maps is still different, right? It's more part of the data visualization layer. Wait a minute, I'm misquoting that a bit. That's a great question. Salvador, can you send me an email? I'll put my contact information and I'll get you some additional information about that, because it's actually a great little, there's my contact information right there. Send me an email and I'll shoot you some information out on that. I've been talking with Karsten Sarsky and a couple of the other product masters and master product managers for that product. And there's some new things coming out on that. So I don't know how much I can tell you about that. But it's interesting. It's really interesting. And essentially, it allows you to do everything you can do within the Google Maps API. Another thing about Google Maps API, while I like it, right, and a lot of people like it, one thing you got to be aware of is geolocation. Geocoding, for example, costs money, okay? There's a very limited amount that you can do per day to get lats and longs from a Google Maps API. It appears that, by the way, there are other techniques you can use. If you're interested, we can talk about that offline. There are some free geolocation sites that I've discovered. A little tricky to use, but you can use web source modules to get the data out. There are some limits on the Oracle geocoding capabilities, but they're much less restrictive than the Google Maps API, right? I'm not saying they're free necessarily. There are some limits, but they're pretty generous by comparison to Google Maps API. From the display perspective, it's very similar to what you would get out in just about any maps situation that's generated. I just started experimenting with that more because I want to build out some really great use cases for that. In fact, I'm going to be presenting on that very heavily in 2021, especially at Kscope and beyond. Oh, I see one question from my friend Ramesh. If we're talking about our candidate, too early to tell. Our candidate here in Illinois 6th, a gentleman I know personally. I met him before in the 2018 election, a gentleman by the name of Sean Caston. Interesting guy, scientist, business owner. He basically retired, sold his businesses, and then decided to get into politics. He was so engaged by what he saw in 2016, and he really wanted to get involved with it. Very interesting, level-headed guy. Certainly not, I'll just say he's a businessman and a scientist, and he's a nerd. I think he's our first official nerd congressman. Hard to tell. He might win a second term, but the Illinois 6th is such a diverse district. It really is. It's also the wealthiest district in Illinois. It's so diverse in terms of income, and it's amazing the people that I met as volunteers from all backgrounds, walks of life, ethnicities, ages, income levels. We're an extremely diverse district. It's really tough to appeal to everyone. So it's going to be an interesting race. There's actually a debate coming up, I think, Friday night on WGN with the two candidates. It might be WGN radio, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's fun, I have to admit. I never thought I'd enjoy it this much. Sorry to go off on the political tangent, blah, 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 blah. You know me. But it's interesting. Let's put it this way. Great use cases, I'll tell you, in politics. It's really interesting, And if you think about it, really, it's not that much different than having a customer base, right? You have to do marketing. You have to have a position about your product. You have to have a position about your competitors' products. It's really fascinating. It really is. And inordinate opportunities for machine learning and application of algorithms and graphics, and mapping. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's me. I guess, Alfredo, can you take the quarter out of me so I can shut up?
All right. Well, I see that there's all the questions, I think, at this
Okay.
point. So I think we're good. Just another reminder, as I plugged at the beginning and Jim plugged as well towards the end
Yeah.
of the presentation next week.
Yeah.
Miss Chris Saxon, he's one half of what was the Ask Tom answer team. He's him and Connor McDonald are the two main people that answer those questions. So you don't want to miss him. He's going to be speaking, I believe, from the UK. So he's one of our 3 European presenters that we got for the 20 and 20, and highly sought after. He was not easy to get. So, but anyway, he'll be speaking on pattern matching plus SQL macros, which equals pure SQL awesomeness. So I think that you're going to really enjoy that one. Spread the news with your fellow colleagues and people in your network. Should be one that you don't want to miss. And we'll see you next week, same time and same day of the week on Wednesday. And thank you, Jim.
You're very welcome, guys. It's always my pleasure to work. And I'm going to be presenting again October 11th, or November 11th, right? More on
Yes.
Apex stuff too. But
That is absolutely.
that's post-election. So we'll see how things go. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to present today. I always enjoy talking with my friends from the Chicagoland neighborhood, my friend.
Thanks, Jim. Everybody have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.